If you were under the impression that Dominic Cummings had already spilled all the beans on his time in government, then over the course of 7 hours of detailed evidence to MPs, the Prime Minister's former chief aide was out to prove that very wrong. Sounding uncharacteristically nervous, he started, perhaps wisely, with an apology.
The truth is that senior ministers, senior officials, senior advisers like me fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect of its government in a crisis like this. When the public needed us most, the government failed. And I'd like to say to all the families of those who died unnecessarily, how sorry I am for the mistakes that were made and for my own mistakes at that.
Downing Street claimed the Prime Minister wasn't watching. If he had, he would have heard his government painted as woefully underprepared for a pandemic that he himself failed to take seriously.
In February, the Prime Minister regarded this as just a scare story. He described it as the new swine flu.
Did you tell him it wasn't?
Certainly. But the view of various officials inside Number 10 was, if we have the Prime Minister chairing COBRA meetings and he just tells everyone it's swine flu, don't worry about it, I'm going to get Chris Whitty to inject me live on TV with coronavirus so everyone realises it's nothing to be frightened of, that would not help.
The Health Secretary too might have looked rather less cheerful about his morning run if he'd known what was coming.
Are you worried about Dominic Cummings giving evidence today, Mr Hancock?
I think that the Secretary of State for Health should have been fired for at least 15, 20 things, including lying to everybody in multiple occasions, in meeting after meeting in the Cabinet room and publicly. I said repeatedly to the Prime Minister that he should be fired. So did the Cabinet Secretary, so did many other senior people.
As for one of the gravest mistakes of the pandemic, the release of hospital patients into care homes without testing, that too he laid at Matt Hancock's door.
Hancock told us in the Cabinet room that people were going to be tested before they went back to care homes. What the hell happened? Now, all the government rhetoric was we put a shield around care homes and blah, blah, blah. It was complete nonsense. Quite the opposite of putting a shield around them. We sent people with COVID back to the care homes.
Matt Hancock might now regret his supportive tweet for Dominic Cummings when he broke lockdown rules by fleeing to Barnard Castle. On that, Mr Cummings had a new explanation. He'd gone because he feared for his family's security.
So before the whole thing happened with the Prime Minister being sick, my wife calling up on the Friday and everything else, it had already been decided that I was going to move my family out of London, regardless of the COVID rules.
Leaving that information out, he now says, was a mistake.
Just the whole thing was a complete disaster. And the truth is, and that it undermined public confidence in the whole thing.
On the man who he helped into Number 10, Mr Cummings now claims Boris Johnson was unfit for office and failed to lock down early enough, either in the spring or autumn, at the cost of tens of thousands of lives, saying he should have told him,
if you announce that you're going to have a lockdown and take serious action now, I will leave, go quietly, we're all friends. If you don't, I'll call a press conference and say the Prime Minister's making a terrible decision that's going to kill thousands of people. And I should have gambled on holding a gun to his head, essentially.
And despite the Prime Minister's denial that he ever said he'd rather let the bodies pile up than order another lockdown, Cummings says,
I heard that in the Prime Minister's study.
Midway through his former aide's evidence, Boris Johnson had to mount his defence at Prime Minister's questions.
None of the decisions have been easy. To go into a lockdown is a traumatic thing for a country. To deal with a pandemic on this scale has been appallingly difficult, and we've at every stage tried to minimise loss of life.
Before he left the building, Mr Cummings was asked whether he regarded the Prime Minister as fit to get us through the rest of the pandemic. No, he replied. After what had come before, no one can have been very surprised.